Welcome back to the Alts Podcast. I'm your host, Horacio Ruiz. We bring you industry leaders and creators to give their insights on the rapidly changing and exciting world of alternative assets. Opinions expressed on this podcast by the host and podcast guests are for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Podcast hosts and guests may maintain positions in the offerings discussed in this podcast. The intro song, Fishing for Pets, is written and composed by Alan Goldshire from his latest release, Live at the Lakeview Lounge. We're so fortunate today to have Howard Epstein. He's a financial advisor, also a lifelong sports memorabilia collector, just a general sports collector, to discuss here a white paper he had written a couple years ago. Howard, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Horacio. Good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We first heard about you from Collectible, and we were fortunate enough to listen to that episode. We actually had Alan on the show a couple weeks ago, and just kind of like talking about this white paper that you had written a couple of years ago about the need to have a little bit more, say, financial know-how when it comes to sports memorabilia, specifically for when somebody is leaving a collection behind. Can you give us some more details about it and what kind of spurred your writing of the white paper?
Okay. Well, I wrote the paper before the pandemic started. And I've always thought for a long time that the whole hobby, sports cards and memorabilia collectibles itself, has been a great alternative asset. I've believed that for the last 15, 20 years. And I've seen it increasing in prices over time. In recession, the market does go down, but usually the collectible market recovers a little bit quicker than the overall market. I've seen that. And I just think it's a great hobby. People love it. People love sports in general. And I think it's probably the biggest hobby in the country. And that's probably far outweighs stamps and coins, which I know was a big hobby at one time. But I think the sports collectible market is really here to stay and increasing in value. And so I wrote the paper because I know that wealth management companies, a lot of times, some people, they get older and they suddenly die or pass away or become incapacitated or whatever the situation is, and their spouse is stuck with the collection sometimes, and they sometimes don't know what to do with it. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't, and they usually end up selling it locally for 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, and they could get a lot more money for their collection if it's a good collection. I mean, some people have collections that are, a lot of it isn't worth that much, but usually wealth management people are higher net worth people, so they probably have something good. Not all of it maybe, but something certainly could be there that's decent and valuable. And so my premise was to help those people inside a wealth management company get, probably closer to 80% instead of 10 or 20%. And that would, of course, help them out financially, as well as their advisor, hopefully invest those funds for them, increase their portfolio. The management company itself would also take a cut. That's how the wealth management business works. And so I figured it was kind of a win-win-win situation. And I wrote the paper specifically really for that reason. And hopefully that somebody within the wealth management community would understand that. And I've talked to a lot of advisors over the last couple of years. They immediately get it. If they're a collector and they're an advisor, they immediately get the whole concept, and they think it's great. And that in a quarter will get me a cup of coffee because it hasn't reached the right people yet in the firm. So still waiting to see if that's going to play out.
So, I mean, you're basically advocating for these wealth management firms to create a new, kind of position within their company that can kind of be called upon when it happens. If someone happens to have, a nice collection, a sports memorabilia collection. And I know we were talking specifically about how a lot of times it happens when, an elderly man, an elderly gentleman passes away and leaves behind this stuff to somebody that doesn't, maybe, a wife or maybe children that don't know what to do with it. That's usually that's kind of a situation we're talking about, right?
Mostly, yes. I mean, there are some women that do collect, but primarily it's men that do collect. And so the women usually don't know necessarily about it. Some do. And I've seen some women at some of the shows I've attended, but it's a large percentage of men that do that. So yeah, if the time comes when they either age out or want to get rid of it or perhaps pass away prematurely, then it needs to have a position in a company to go to have your go-to person to say, okay, talk to the family about this. With the technology today with Zoom and FaceTime and all this stuff, you don't even have to travel to go see a collection. I can talk to somebody in 15 minutes. I can tell if they have anything worthwhile or not. And then they can get the items directly to the auction houses. They'll get their cut. I have deals with the auction houses. Everything would work very well for everybody. So it's a shame that nothing's happening, at least as far as yet is concerned.
Yeah. So, you will say that you have had these conversations, but for one reason or another, your call to action hasn't actually occurred, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It just needs the top management of the company, probably a collector that would get it and say, gee, this is a good idea, because it really is a good idea. I haven't talked to anybody in the collectible field that doesn't think it's a good idea. So I know it will work, but like I said, it hasn't worked as of yet. I'm still hopeful. We'll see.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a win-win, right? For the family, the wealth management firm, and also for the individual who's kind of cutting those deals. What would something like that look like? So a position like that. So somebody comes into the firm, they have a collection, and then that person would kind of, like you mentioned before, direct them, whether it's to a specific auction house or whether it's to, a specific, even people that run estate sales, right? They maybe do a good job of doing, or would it be just that one person kind of like taking a collection and overseeing its liquidation, whether it's through, online auctions, eBay, things like that? What do you envision that looking like?
I don't see it doing it online because that takes a lot of work for that individual to do that. I think it's more of seeing what the collection is, value or the scope of the collection essentially, and seeing which auction house may be best suited for that particular person. Those items. And the house, they're the experts, okay? Not the client. They're the experts. They know how to sell the stuff. They know how to package it in different lots and so forth. They're the ones that know what they're doing. And so I would go in to a wealth management community and I wouldn't speak to the individuals until they had a need. I would speak with the advisors. I've spoken to a lot of people in the collectible market, and I ask a lot of them, I say, do you have an advisor? The ones that do have an advisor, a financial advisor, the next question I always ask is, have they ever asked you about your collection? And the answer I always receive is, no, they don't. Okay, or they don't know I have it. So you really just have to get the advisors just to ask if that's the situation. And so that's the premise of what I would do within an organization. And then once they've at least asked the question, nothing may happen. I mean, the person may not even tell you they have a collection because some people are secretive about it. But if the guy all of a sudden passed away and he had a collection and his wife was stuck with it, she may remember that the advisor asked that question and call him and get me involved. Somebody like myself. That's when it would happen. It wouldn't be, I wouldn't go out and speak to all the people. If they have a question, I'd be happy to answer it, things like that. One of the things that you had asked me prior to us getting on was the loan situation. So there's oftentimes somebody may have a big collection and they want to increase their collection and maybe they don't have the funds. They want to see about getting a loan. Well, you can get a loan from a wealth management firm with putting a collateral, some of the portfolio that you have. And I would maybe advocate some of that. It depends on the situation. But if somebody wants to do that, the advisors know how to do that stuff. And I was called in to speak to somebody and they wanted to just increase their collection. I could talk to them about that. It's not going to, they're not going to liquidate it, but I could at least speak to them. I don't mind doing that. That's something I don't mind.
Yeah, that was part of the white paper. So before I kind of follow up on that, where can people, if they're curious about reading the white paper, where would be the easiest place to go read it?
I believe they can find it on my LinkedIn page, hopefully. If not, I think if they Google my name and then put sports cards after that, there's a lot of the podcasts are out there. And I think the one from Barron's that was out there back in January, I think there's a link to the paper in that podcast as well. If you pull down the written part of the podcast.
Definitely. And I think, on the LinkedIn, that's where I found the white paper. I was just wondering if there was somewhere where it's, been promoted a little bit more or whatever, but the LinkedIn definitely was one of the first options. So just to get our listeners a better idea, if they're interested in reading it, it's like a 4-page paper. And it just basically is advocating for.
Well, it's more than 4 pages, although it doesn't take long to read.
Let me clear. A 4-page single spaced paper. I mean, no, it's a good read, but it's got its arguments. It's got its points, just so everybody knows, kind of what we're talking about. Secondly, that there was a part about the paper where it was about taking out loans, and it's so funny because, and I wrote in one of the notes, I actually approached my wife about doing that, and she looked at me like I was crazy, taking out some home equity or something like that to add a piece of sports memorabilia.
Done that.
People, I'm sure. And if she had said yes, I asked my wife, can we do this? Half joking, but kind of half serious. Because if she had said, okay, if you feel like that's right, I would have been to the bank the next day. And it was to get a Roberto Clemente game used bat that, Roberto Clemente is one of my heroes. And,
Okay.
and I'm sorry, say it again.
Probably couldn't have lost with that.
No. And that's the thing. Like, to me, it's like, this, I kind of like the way that you're talking about, and this market's going up. And not just that though, it's like a Roberto Clemente bat is a museum piece. Like to me, it's something that is iconic and then I don't know, but in any case, you mentioned that is a viable strategy, right? That people have done that before to add to their collection. And it made me feel like, oh man, I'm glad I'm not, I thought I was crazy for just thinking it.
Well, it was really in the context of getting it a loan from your portfolio within the wealth management firm. But you can certainly take another second mortgage out on your house if you do that. I mean, I wasn't going to advocate that, but people do that.
Yeah, and we did talk about another collection actually prior to going on air about that. Cool. So we got that. You're also, you're talking from a point of experience. You've been a collector, I know we talked about since at least the 70s. Could you talk about that? You seeing the evolution? I mean, I know you said that you always thought it'd be big. What was it like though, being a collector in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and those cycles that you've seen?
Well, I mean, like I said in the paper, I mentioned this stuff. There have been downturns in the market. The economy, the market takes a hit at the same time, but I've seen the market in the memorabilia market come back quicker, recover quicker than the overall market. So I think it's pretty resilient. And I think the people, like I mentioned, love sports. I think the breadth of it is just getting deeper and deeper. And there's more and more people in it. And as the press gets a hold of more things, they always see things like perhaps like the Uncle G collection from a couple of years ago that made press. And you can see other things that the press, 5.2 million, the PSA 9 that sold a couple of years, 2-3 years ago. So people wake up and see that. And then some of those people say, I think I have some of that stuff in the attic. And that's what happened on some of those calls as well. So people have seen it and they went to the closet or the attic or parents' house in upstate, whatever, New York or something like those things. Over the last few months, I've talked to a lot of firms and they've contacted me through the paper and so forth and some of the podcasts. And they say, I had the exact situation you just podcast. And this is not scientific, but I think that situation occurs probably about once a week in the country where someone is, needs to get rid of a collection for whatever reason and gets by, 10%, 20% locally. And you just don't hear about these things. You only hear about the things that make the press, the big collection or something like that make the press, like Thomas Newman's collection, from last year. And he passed away from COVID. Right. And in fact, one of I have a little black book from when I used to run shows back in the early days. And I had all these names, and I looked at it about a month ago, and Thomas Newman's name was in there because I used to live in Florida. And I knew him at one time, and I forgot I knew him. I had his phone number and everything in Tampa, and I lost touch a long time ago, and I didn't even think of the name. But when I was looking through my book, he was in there, amongst others. And I thought, wow, it's just unbelievable. He had a great collection. Thomas
Newman was the doctor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember listening. Yep, hearing about him.
Yeah, he sold the collection for about $20 million, at one of the auction houses in California, I think. So yeah, it's just amazing some of the stuff that's out there. And the good stuff, like you collect Roberto Clemente. He's a great guy to collect. I mean, Hall of Famer, obviously deceased. He can't do anything bad. So a la Jay Simpson or something like that. Some of these newer players, they're still playing. I mean, hopefully they'll make the Hall of Fame. Hopefully they won't do anything dumb. But some of these guys, like the Aarons, Mazes, Mantles, Lenny's, Jackie Robinsons, guys, and even Williams and DiMaggio would be next tier, in my opinion. Of course, you got Ruth and Garrick and those guys back in the early days. So it's those are the breadwinners to me. Excuse me.
Absolutely. And so we talked about your journey as a collector. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Like, I mean, how long you've collected for, what you personally, you give out some advice, what do you plan on doing, or how do you see your collection going in a couple of years, when it's time for you to decide, should I keep this or should I, hand it down or auction it off? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll probably end up auctioning off pieces of my collection eventually. Haven't really done that yet, although my wife would love me to get rid of everything now.
Yeah.
I told her if I did, what would I do? I'd probably bug her. So I'm very passionate about it. I still enjoy it. I still like looking at the stuff. I'll probably auction some stuff off over time. I don't think I'm going to be handing it down to my kids, although they would certainly take it. But they're only in it for the money. My son, when he was very young, in fact, I talked to my wife about this today. He was only 5 or 6 years old, and I gave him a couple of packs of cards. And he was sitting on the edge of the fireplace, opening them up, and he had his scissors in it, and he started cutting up the cards. I looked at my wife and I said, "He's not touching my collection," and he hasn't.
Yeah. That's so funny. I have 3 boys. My 6 and 4-year-old, I've been slowly getting them into cards. I could tell it's going to be my oldest son who's going to be the collector. My 4-year-old is like, bending them and throwing them. The other one is like taking very careful, taking care of them and the top loaders and everything. So yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, why am I collecting this stuff? And it's just, you can't help it, right? It means something to you. And we talked about that. A lot of it is memories, your memories from when you're a child, just things when maybe you viewed things a little bit differently. I don't know. I could get deep into that. I'm not going to do it, but it means something to us, right?
Right. Yeah, it does. I was one of these guys that collected. I guess I'm a set collector. I just figured, people collect teams or whatever. If you like the Yankees or whatever, I'm buying Yankees. If you like the Yankees, you collect all the Yankees. I figured, okay, if I collect the entire set, I've got all the teams. You end up getting the whole set. So I've always been a set collector from early on, and I was never one that stuck the cards in the bike spokes and that. So I took care of my card since I was a child. I've been taken care of pretty good. I mean, I didn't bend them and things like that, which was good. And then the other big saving grace for me is my mother never threw mine out, so that was a big plus for me.
It's another one. I guess you were meant to be a financial advisor, from the get-go. I mean, you saw the value in those things, by taking care of it. Right. We've talked about the white paper. We've kind of talked about your hopes for it in terms of, wealth management firms taking, your advice and helping out their clients, right? Because essentially that's what it is helping them, how do I say, quantify or validate these collections that people are so passionate about, not just losing them, right? And selling them off at a steep rebate to whoever, but actually, giving people the value, the worth of the collection that somebody has spent their time, accumulating. The other end is this. I know that you've done some appraising. What if somebody wants to get into appraising? What goes into that? And really, what does that mean? Can someone be just sort of like a local appraiser, or do they have to kind of make a national name for themselves?
Well, I think, if you can get a national name for yourself, I think that's great. But I don't know of any particular agency or anything that you can go and study to be an appraiser. I know that some of it's coins or stamps or things like that, other type of collectibles, they might have something organized like that. I don't know of anything organized, at least yet, that we have in our industry to say, oh, you got a certificate to do this. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is something out there. But I think decades of experience gives me that qualification already. And if you've been around it as long as I have, you just pick up a lot of stuff over time. And I've got a pretty heavy collection of price guides and things things like that, going back into the 40s. So I've seen the history of things and the value of things pretty much. And I know that the grading companies, since the early 90s have really ended all that, and 1 through 10 and all that kind of stuff. Many different grading companies out there. And a lot of people are looking for graded cards. And it's important. You can buy an ungraded card if you know what you're looking at and you maybe measure it. You can trim them now. So you got to know what you're looking for. So there's a lot that goes into it. And a lot of times, even on like Antique Roadshow, which I love to watch a show, see some of the appraisers on Antique Roadshow, and they give you a range. Oh, it's anywhere from 500 to 2,000. Well, that's a pretty big range, okay? But they have to cover themselves because they don't know in an auction, it only takes 2 people to really drive a price up. So maybe they're right.
Absolutely. Just because I think of an appraiser, of somebody starting a business that way. We talk about like the emergence of the local card shops recently, and which is crazy because there were 3 card shops that opened up in the last year and a half by where I live. And now I'm down to 1. 2 of them went out of business or, they closed shop. And I'm just thinking like, if someone loves sports, that's a good sort of market to get into where if you have knowledge, if you've kind of been in there for a couple of years, you can kind of, market your services with the amount of information that's out there as well and begin to sort of, be an appraiser. But I don't know if that's kind of taboo, in terms of like you're looked down upon if like you said, you don't have that certification or you don't have that wealth of experience. I'm just kind of curious about that, about if these wealth management firms aren't going to hire a department, well, who steps in for them, right?
Well, I think really nobody's the answer. That's the unfortunate thing about it. And the reason why I targeted the wealth management firms to begin with, beside the fact that I'm in one, is that these people that are in wealth management firms usually have higher net worths than the average person. So hopefully they have a more average collection than the average person. So there'd be reason to, get these things to auction once someone needs to or passes away or becomes incapacitated. So it's really a shame that this hasn't occurred yet. And I'm hopeful it still will. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, Howard, it was great talking to you. Really appreciate all the insights and kind of like the argument that you lay out for this, position that could be done. And like you said, everyone wins. It's just a matter of reaching out, finding that local expert or even a national expert that might be, available with a phone call or a Zoom meeting like we're doing right now. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Howard, is there any other way? I know you're on LinkedIn. Any other way people can connect with you in case, they're interested?
Well, it's on my LinkedIn page. I've got my email address on there too. I'll give it to you. It's hepstein710@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, Howard, thanks again. It was great talking to you, and best of luck. Hopefully somebody takes your advice.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Yep.
Howard is a sports collectible insider with a life's worth of experience. Pair that with his experience as a financial advisor, and he has seen firsthand the need for financial advisors to provide specific services for lifelong collectors. It would be a shame if a collection decades in the making gets sold for pennies on the dollar, inadvertently for lack of knowledge. Howard is advocating for a change. Alternative assets like sports memorabilia are every bit the assets that stocks and bonds are. If you enjoyed today's podcast, let others know about it. We find our guests so interesting and knowledgeable, and I know others will too. Or leave a review or hit the follow button. Until the next episode, take care.